Rain poured down like a judgment from the heavens the day Maria's father was lowered into the earth. The sky wept harder than the woman clinging dramatically to the edge of his coffin. Jane, her stepmother, dressed in black silk and crocodile tears, sobbed loudly for all to see, but her eyes remained dry and calculating. Maria, only 15, stood apart from the crowd in a plain black dress that clung to her rain-soaked skin. Her hands trembled as she clutched the fingers of one of the housemaids, the only soul who dared to show her any warmth that day. Her heart splintered not only from the loss of her father, but from the glance Jane shot her across the grave, cold and sharp like a blade. It was a glance that said without words, "Your life as you know it is over." Her father, the man who had built an empire from nothing, who once told her bedtime stories of kings and queens, and whispered that she was his little lioness, was gone. And everything he left behind, his companies, his properties, his legacy, now belonged to the woman who saw Maria as a nuisance, a reminder of the life he had before her. That night, the mansion felt different, hollow. Maria was not led to her room like before. Jane pointed to the garage with a twisted smile. "That's your place now," she said without emotion. "Don't worry. The rats don't bite much." No one spoke up for her. Not the butler who used to sneak her sweets. Not the maids who used to braid her hair. They all bowed their heads and turned away. Days blurred into each other. Maria's world collapsed under the weight of betrayal. She was forbidden from going to school. Her uniforms were thrown out. Her books were taken from her hands and burned in the backyard fire pit. Every morning she was yanked from her thin mat in the garage before sunrise to begin scrubbing floors, polishing windows, and preparing meals she wasn't allowed to eat. Jane's voice was the first sound she heard each morning, barking orders, criticizing her posture, slapping her with words like weapons. Sometimes Jane would throw leftovers on the floor and order Maria to eat like the dog she had become. The taste of humiliation was worse than the hunger. Nights were worse. She curled up on a threadbare mat with no pillow, no warmth, and no hope. Her stomach growled louder than the thunder outside. When rain leaked through the garage roof, she lay soaked in silence, tracing her father's name into the dirt, with her finger whispering to him in the dark. "I miss you. I'm still your lioness. I'll come back for everything she stole." Clara and Daniel, Jane's children, were the only light in her darkness. Clara, only 7, would sneak into the garage in the middle of the night, carrying a crust of bread wrapped in a napkin or a soft blanket she'd stolen from her own bed. Daniel, barely 5, would hug her and whisper, "You're my favorite Maria." Their love was innocent and pure, a rebellion of kindness in a world of cruelty. But Jane noticed everything. One night she found Clara hugging Maria tightly. Her rage was volcanic. She slapped the bread from Maria's hands, yanked Clara away by the arm, and screamed threats about sending the children to a faraway boarding school if they ever disobeyed her again. That night, Maria didn't cry for herself. She cried for Clara and Daniel. She knew now no one was coming to save her. She would have to become her own salvation. Her heart hardened not from hate, but from necessity. She stopped wishing. She started planning. The breaking point came a week later. Jane slapped Maria across the face in front of the house staff for accidentally spilling tea on the carpet. The pain didn't matter. What broke her was the silence. The same maids who once called her little princess looked away as if she were invisible. Maria stared at their shoes, feeling smaller than dust. That night, as she scrubbed the marble floors with trembling fingers, something in her snapped. She had nothing left except her will. She returned to the garage, packed a tattered sweater her father had once given her, a photo of him, holding her as a baby, and a small notebook she had kept hidden beneath a loose tile. With her hands trembling and her heart beating like a war drum, She opened the garage door and stepped into the night. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay. Her legs carried her farther than she thought possible, farther than her fear could follow. By dawn, she stood exhausted at the gates of a quiet, stately home nestled in the hills. The house belonged to Mr. Kenneth Okoro, her father's oldest friend, a man who had once called her Little Heiress and let her sit on his shoulders when she was barely tall enough to reach the sink. Her knees gave out. She collapsed on the stone steps and with her last strength rang the bell. "Please," she whispered as the world faded to black. "Please don't let me disappear." Warmth. That was the first thing Maria felt when she awoke. Not the chill of cement floors or the ache in her bones from sleeping curled on cold garage tiles, but warmth, real, gentle, human warmth. Soft sunlight poured through pale linen curtains, casting golden shadows across the room. She was wrapped in thick blankets, her head resting on a pillow that smelled faintly of lavender. The distant sound of birdsong replaced the clang of pots or the sharp slap of her stepmother's voice. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. Then she turned and saw Mrs. Okoro sitting beside her eyes, wet with tears, stroking her tangled hair as if afraid she would vanish. "My God," the older woman whispered, voice cracking. "What have they done to you, child?" Maria wanted to speak, to tell her everything, but her throat ached and her heart was too full. All she could do was let the tears come silently as Mrs. Okoro pulled her into an embrace that smelled of rosewater and home. Later that day, Mr. Okoro entered the room. The moment his eyes fell on her frail frame, so thin, so bruised, so hollow, his face darkened. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. He had seen enough. He turned to his wife and said firmly, "Call the doctor. She stays here now. This is her home." And so began Maria's rebirth. The next few weeks were slow and strange. Her body healed faster than her heart. The doctor visited regularly. Nurses came and went. A tutor arrived to help her slowly return to her studies. But every loud voice, every sudden noise made her flinch. She tiptoed through the house, at first always bracing for someone to shout or strike. At night, she couldn't sleep unless the door was locked and the hallway light left on. She would lie awake staring at the ceiling, half expecting Jane's face to appear in the shadows. But the Okoros were patient, gentle. They never raised their voices. They never questioned her silences. Their daughter Kim, about Maria's age, quickly became her anchor. Kim would knock on her door every morning with a tray of breakfast and say, "Today you're going to smile. Just once. That's my mission." And sometimes Maria did. At first just barely. But then one morning she laughed, a short, surprised sound that startled them both. And it felt like cracking open the sky. Kim introduced Maria to her friends. They accepted her, instantly drawn to her quiet strength, though none of them knew the full story. Maria didn't need them to. She wasn't ready to speak of what had happened. Not yet. But she was learning to speak of other things, books, school ideas. She buried herself in her studies, often staying up late into the night, reading by lamplight, determined to catch up on the years Jane had stolen. The walls of her new bedroom became covered in notes, equations, and quotes from her favorite books. On her desk sat a small frame, the photo of her father holding her as a baby. Every night before sleeping, she whispered to it, "I'm coming back, Daddy. I'm not gone. I'm just getting ready." Months passed. Her body grew stronger, her mind sharper. Her heart, still wounded, began to beat with purpose. She no longer shrank from mirrors or flinched when someone raised their hand. She began to walk taller, speak clearer, trust herself again. The girl in the garage was not gone. She was evolving, A year after her escape, Mr. Okoro, always dignified and calm, decided to make a formal move. He reached out to Jane, not to fight, not to accuse, but to mediate, to ask if Maria might at least visit her father's home again, perhaps access her inheritance. He believed, perhaps naively, that a conversation might restore some sense of justice. But Jane's reply came cold and swift. "She ran away," she said. "She chose to leave. Let her stay gone. That house is no longer hers." The words hit like a slap, but Maria no longer broke. She read the email, closed the laptop, and nodded. "Then I'll build something better," she said quietly. "I'll make a name so powerful, she'll have no choice but to remember me." From that moment, something shifted in Maria. She stopped trying to heal for survival. She began healing for war. She studied business, finance, economics. She devoured every book in the Okoros's vast library. Mr. Okoro noticed, and one day he placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "I think it's time we stopped pretending. You are not just healing anymore, Maria. You're preparing to lead." And so he began to mentor her, not as a father figure, but as a kingmaker grooming his heir. They worked side by side. He taught her strategy, leadership, the art of negotiation. He told her stories of Africa's greatest business minds and reminded her, "Your father built an empire with grit and vision. You carry both in your blood." Maria no longer cried at night. She no longer whispered to her father's photo in grief, but in gratitude. "I'm learning, Dad. I'm not who I used to be." Her heart no longer begged to be rescued. It beat with resolve. She didn't want revenge. She wanted restoration. And when the time came when Jane's empire began to tremble, Maria would not just knock on the gates of her past. She would own them. Maria stood at the edge of a rooftop in Lagos, the city lights flickering below like a map of stars scattered across a restless earth. The wind pulled at her curls as she stared out into the horizon, her mind sharper than it had ever been. Below her, in a sleek glass building bearing no trace of her name, was her company. Her vision turned reality. At just 19, Maria had launched a startup unlike any other, a financial tech firm focused on redirecting dormant corporate wealth into funding for orphanages and educational programs across Africa. Investors didn't just see numbers when they met her. They saw purpose wrapped in disciplined fire in soft eyes. They called her heiress, the name her father once gave her. It was a whisper from her past turned into a name that commanded boardrooms. But no one knew the full truth. They didn't know that heiress had once been the forgotten girl in a garage fed scraps like a stray animal. They didn't know that every line of code, every business proposal, every sleepless night spent pitching her ideas to skeptical men was born from a hunger deeper than profit. It was justice she sought, and she would feed it carefully, patiently, until it was strong enough to consume everything Jane had built on lies. Word began to spread quietly that Orville Holdings, the company her father had founded, the one now under Jane's reign, was crumbling. Maria didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She simply read the articles in silence, her fingers tracing the initials of her father's name on the brass medallion she wore around her neck. Jane had sold off key subsidiaries, made reckless investments, and alienated former allies. Scandals brewed beneath the surface: corruption, embezzlement, and neglect. The empire once built on vision had become a sinking ship helmed by greed. Maria made her moves quietly. Through proxies, she acquired shares. She merged with firms once loyal to her father. She partnered with former executives who still remembered the golden days of Orville and saw in Maria a flicker of the man they once followed. Her identity remained a mystery to the public. To them, she was heiress, the bold, enigmatic entrepreneur, rewriting the rules of wealth in Africa. But to a few, she was Maria, daughter of the fallen king, sharpening her blade beneath a veil of elegance. Every morning she woke before the sun, not to scrub floors, but to study financial reports and lead strategy meetings. Her name began to appear in magazines, whispered in political circles, discussed at conferences. "Who is she?" they asked. "Where did she come from?" No one knew the storm behind her silence, the garage behind her grace. The moment came on a quiet Tuesday. Maria, now 21, received the final audit report on Orville Holdings. It was devastating. Misappropriated funds, plummeting stock, legal exposure. With one phone call, she initiated the final phase. A board meeting was scheduled. A new majority shareholder would be revealed. Jane, unaware, arrived in her usual luxury diamond earrings, designer heels, and that smile she wore like a crown. But the boardroom was colder than she remembered. Faces turned away from her. Whispers fell silent. Maria entered poised and elegant in a tailored black suit, her chin held high. She didn't take a seat at the edge of the room. She sat at the head of the table. Jane froze. For a moment, she didn't recognize her. Then the color drained from her face. "Good afternoon, Mother," Maria said calmly. "Let's discuss the future of this company. A future without you." Silence fell like a blade. What followed was not a scene of rage or revenge. Maria presented the audit findings, outlined her restructuring plan, and answered questions with composure. Her voice never shook. Her eyes never left Jane's. The board voted. It was unanimous. Jane was removed. As security escorted her out, Jane turned back, eyes wide with disbelief, lips trembling. "You don't know what you're doing," she said, her voice shaking. "You think this will make you whole?" Maria didn't flinch. "This isn't about being whole. This is about restoring what you broke. It was never yours to destroy." That night, as the sun sank over the skyline, Maria stood alone in her father's old office, the same one she had been banished from as a child. The desk still bore faint carvings in the wood, where she had once traced her initials. She lit a single candle, placed her father's photograph beside it, and whispered, "I did it, Daddy. I'm back." She didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and breathed. She wasn't finished. She was only just beginning. The boardroom was hers now. The halls echoed not with Jane's click of entitlement, but with quiet efficiency and purpose. Orville Holdings was no longer a decaying legacy clinging to its name. Under Maria's direction, it was reborn, leaner, smarter, with new values and a new heart. Yet as she sat in her father's chair each morning, reviewing reports, planning expansions, and listening to pitches, she knew her real work had only begun. Rescuing the company was just one part of the story. The harder part was facing the ghosts. Jane was gone in title, but not in presence. The press hounded her scandal after scandal, peeling away the last of her dignity. Former allies abandoned her. Properties were seized. Creditors called. Maria watched it all with the same calm expression she wore in the boardroom. She didn't need to humiliate Jane publicly. Truth was doing it for her. But Maria wasn't here for destruction. She was here for restoration. She had spared Jane because of Clara and Daniel, still so young, still so unaware of the full ugliness of what had happened. They were her soft spot, the only part of the past she didn't want to erase. Quietly, Maria arranged for them to live with trusted guardians, enrolled them in the best schools, and made sure they had everything she once longed for: warmth, safety, freedom to dream. They wrote her letters filled with crayon drawings and words like, "Thank you, big sister." Maria read them alone behind locked doors and let her tears fall silently, tears not of grief, but of something close to healing. Jane, stripped of wealth and reputation, tried to reach out. A handwritten letter came first. Rambling, confused, full of excuses. Then a voicemail, pleading, her voice smaller than Maria had ever heard it. I didn't know. I didn't mean, it said. Maria didn't reply. She wasn't ready. Her silence wasn't vengeance, it was self-preservation. But the past wouldn't stay buried. One day, as the first rain of the season misted the windows of the estate, Maria made a decision. She invited Jane to the mansion, not to reconcile, to reckon. The drawing room was dimly lit when Jane arrived. She looked like a shadow of her former self, hair thinner, clothes, simpler hands trembling as she held her purse like a shield. Maria sat across from her in silence. Jane didn't speak right away. When she finally did, it was a whisper. "You've done well for yourself." Maria didn't blink. "I did what you said I couldn't, what you tried to prevent." Jane winced. "I was afraid of losing everything." "And so you chose to destroy me?" "No," Jane said quickly. "I didn't mean to. You were just in the way." Maria's jaw clenched. She stood and walked to the window, rain trailing down the glass like old wounds reopened. "You locked me in a garage. You starved me. You stole my name, my birthright, my future, and I survived anyway." She turned. "What do you want now?" "I want to say sorry," Jane said, voice cracking. "I want a chance to be part of something, anything, even just to see the children." Maria studied her carefully. She saw the woman who once called her worthless, the woman who tore up her school books and threw bread to the floor like scraps. But she also saw someone broken, not humbled, not yet, but beginning to fall apart in ways only shame can cause. "You must prove that you can change," Maria said evenly. "Not for me, for yourself. Only then will there be peace." Jane nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks. "How?" "Start by admitting it all, out loud. No lies, no stories, just truth." Jane's lips trembled. "I was cruel. I was jealous. I hated that your father loved you more than he ever loved me. I hated that you reminded him of a life I could never control. And I punished you for it." Silence hung heavy. Maria nodded once. "That's a start." They sat like that for a long time, two women shaped by the same man's absence, staring at the space between them, as if it could hold everything that had been lost. When Jane left, she didn't hug Maria. She simply whispered, "Thank you," and walked out into the rain. Maria didn't feel victorious. She felt light. She stepped out onto the balcony as thunder rumbled in the distance, and for the first time in years, she breathed without heaviness. The past would never vanish, but she no longer wore it like chains. Inside, Clara and Daniel waited in the library with a card they'd made that read, "We love you, big sister. Thank you for choosing us." Maria knelt, gathered them in her arms, and kissed their foreheads. "No one will ever hurt you," she said. "Not while I'm here." She wasn't just rebuilding a company. She was rebuilding a family. One she chose. One built on love, not power. She had faced Jane, not to crush her, but to finally let go. And in doing so, Maria reclaimed something more valuable than her father's empire. She reclaimed herself. The sun dipped low over the hills of Lagos, casting long golden beams through the arched windows of the Orville estate. Maria stood on the balcony, the same spot her father once stood, as he looked out over the land he built. But today, it wasn't empire she saw, it was possibility. In her hands, she held a letter written in Clara's delicate handwriting, full of words like dream, school, and someday. At the bottom was a little drawing of 3 figures, 2 children, and 1 tall woman with a cape. "You're our hero," it read. Maria smiled, but it was not the soft smile of a girl rescued. It was the steady smile of a woman who had fought, endured, and emerged unshaken. The battles she had fought were not only in boardrooms or legal files, they were in her soul, against self-doubt, against pain, against every voice that ever told her she was nothing more than a mistake in a silk-draped world. She had rewritten all of them. The Orville Holdings of today was no longer the playground of the powerful or the pet project of the privileged. Under Maria's direction, it had transformed into a social titan investing in women-owned enterprises, funding rural schools, and building tech hubs across sub-Saharan Africa. Each initiative was personal, each success a stone in the new foundation she was laying, not for herself, but for every forgotten girl, every silenced voice, every child who had once been told to sit quietly in the shadows. Maria's name now carried weight, not from legacy, but from proof. Heiress Holdings, as she had renamed her personal branch of the empire, became synonymous with integrity and transformation. Investors no longer asked about her past. They asked where she was going next. Her name appeared in editorials not as a scandal or a mystery, but as a symbol of modern African leadership, young, female, fierce. But behind the accolades, there were quiet moments. Moments when she walked through the halls of the estate at night, trailing her fingers along the walls, remembering what it felt like to be 15 and afraid. Sometimes she sat in her father's old study reading his journals by lamplight. In the margins of one, she found a line he had written long ago. "A legacy means nothing if it doesn't create a future." She was his future. Jane, now living in a modest home outside the city, no longer sought to reclaim her power. Instead, she wrote pages of apology, pages of regret. Maria read them when she had the strength. She never replied directly, but she allowed Jane limited contact with Clara and Daniel. Not because Jane deserved it, but because the children did. Maria protected them as fiercely as she once longed to be protected. She ensured their every need was met, their every birthday celebrated, their every dream funded. She didn't just raise them, she freed them. One evening, as they sat under the wide branches of a mango tree in the estate's garden, Daniel turned to her and said, "Do you ever get scared?" Maria looked up at the stars, her heart catching at the simplicity of the question. "I used to," she said softly. "All the time. But I learned something." "What?" "That being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you fight anyway. Even when your hands are shaking. Even when no one believes you." Daniel nodded solemnly, the kind of nod that made him look far older than his age. Clara leaned against Maria's shoulder. "You always fought for us." "I always will," Maria said, kissing the top of her head. Her story began in silence, in darkness, in exile. But it would not end there. She had chosen compassion when she could have chosen vengeance. She had chosen vision when she could have chosen comfort. And in doing so, she had broken the cycle. She was not Jane's reflection. She was her opposite. Where Jane hoarded power, Maria shared it. Where Jane used love as leverage, Maria gave it freely. Years later, as Maria stood before a crowd of students at the opening of the Heiress Institute for Girls in Rural Innovation, she told her story. Not with bitterness, but with truth. She told them about the girl in the garage, the crumbs of bread, the whisper in the dark. She told them about rebuilding, about how you could start with nothing but grief and still create greatness. And when they clapped, not out of sympathy but out of awe, Maria smiled with full heart. She wasn't the heir to her father's kingdom anymore. She had built her own.